want to start with the Andrew Wiggins thing because I am a believer that environment matters for all of us. It matters. A happier employee is a better employee. I think Wiggins is going to work in Golden State simply because of that. Forget everything else. Do you?
Yes. But I don't think it's just environment, okay? Remember, he had a reputation that preceded him when he grew up in Canada, played at Kansas, as being a guy who he just played, not an alpha.
That's right.
Not a killer.
Right.
And then that kind of got reestablished. And then remember, now they add Karl Towns. They had Jimmy Butler. That didn't work.
Right.
He's been through multiple head coaches, different front offices during his tenure, which is not a long tenure in Minnesota. I think it has to do with environment. Fit is a big thing, right? And Steve Kerr talked about that going back to Friday, is that we think he fits here.
Right.
And expectations. And remember, he signed this massive contract to remain in Minnesota, and there were no wins to show for it. So it feels like empty stats. It's really hard to tell what your stats are in correlation to the effect that you have on the game. There are plenty of players that put up big numbers in the NBA in games that don't matter, and then you put them in a real NBA game and they can't function.
Right.
I think the expectations, you mentioned Thursday, you're like, look, Canadian Harrison Barnes. I think that's reasonable. I think he should be a better version of that.
I think he's more athletic.
Well, yeah, there's a lot. I mean, he's a different player, but it's the idea of they don't need an alpha, they don't need a beta. I mean, like, look, the leadership and toughness the toughness is Draymond. The go-to guy is Steph.
The defender.
The defender and defensive leader, as well as best shot maker, shooter, in the league is Klay Thompson. Like, he can just play and not carry the burden of being a franchise player, and that fits who he is.
Well, I think you too. We're both parents. And something that's fascinating about parenting is that kids' personalities are established really early.
Yes.
Like 4 years old, you're like, he's stubborn, she's sweet, she's bossy, I mean, and my daughter and my son, about 4 years old, they are what they are. They're just taller. And I think your first saying was, Andrew Wiggins, and you really have a close connection to college basketball, and especially Bill Self. You nailed it. He's not an alpha. This is who he is. He's a smart, thoughtful kid who wants to ball, but he doesn't want. This is the kind of place where Kevin Garnett was an alpha, and he struggled pulling Minnesota up. Andrew's a good kid.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot to the Garnett thing. If you remember, they had the Joe Smith contract, which was, there was a special contract in the desk, and they lost 3 first-round picks for it. That really set Minnesota back for years. Yeah. There's a lot to why Minnesota hasn't been able to hit. Last year, they went all in, and it didn't work.
Right.
And look, he's getting some of the blame, rightfully so. Karl Anthony Towns has got none of the blame.
Yeah.
There's lots of people in the NBA that think he's not a winning player because he's too smart. He doesn't love basketball, right? He's very good at basketball, but does he love it?
Right.
And the fact that he meets D'Angelo Russell at the airport, like, hey, D'Angelo Russell, there's another guy who's a losing player that puts up big stats.
Right.
Brooklyn doesn't miss him. Golden State doesn't miss him. It's about fit. D'Angelo Russell can score points, can have assists, but he didn't fit with how they want to play in Golden State. In Golden State, they want to play where the ball moves, and he's more of a ball mover. He doesn't need ball screens in order to play. I think he'll be fantastic as their third offensive option. They still have their first-round pick. They have Minnesota's first-round pick next year, their own first-round pick next year. This also gives them cap flexibility this offseason as opposed to next offseason. I think this is – and here's one last thing. We all have this imaginary idea of what Golden State should have done. It's not like the rest of the league's like, hey, Golden State, they could use another piece. Let's find a way to trade our best player to help them out. Right? You're only going to trade D'Angelo Russell if, one, you need a lead guard who can come off of a ball screen.
Minnesota
and two,
needed that.
Right? And two, you have a contract that you want to part with that Golden State wants. Right? It's called a trade for a reason. So while you may not like the deal, tell me the better deal out there for Golden State. It likely doesn't exist.
By the way, an interesting team is, we were talking about this morning as a staff. If you go to the Western Conference and the Eastern Conference, the first 4 teams in each have a pretty strong identity. You know who's taking the shot last. You kind of know what they are. When you get to the 5th team in both the West and the East, it's the Sixers and Houston. And you're like, man, they're talented. I'm not really sure what they are. So when I look at Houston, and I could take their loss last night, but it doesn't, the bottom line is.
I actually think there was something interesting, but go ahead.
But when I look at Houston, I see Philadelphia. And there's no identity. The GM's analytic driven. The owner wanted to sell tickets. The coach is passive aggressive. The 2 stars are uber talented. I'm not sure they fit. I look at Philly and I look at Houston, and I say to myself, really interesting, kind of an interesting mess. When you look at Houston,
Yeah.
let's talk about the Houston team.
Let's talk Houston. Okay, first, you bring up a great point, which I didn't bring up Friday, and I should have. It's what is Mike D'Antoni known for? Everybody thinks 7 seconds or less, right?
Right.
And Sean Marion, moving to the 4. Steve Nash, 2-time MVP, but his entire offense is based upon screen roll action and all of the spacing and all of the movement. It's changed basketball. What they were able to do, spread screen roll, having Amari Stoudemire roll and everybody else space the floor.
By the way, it's why he keeps getting good jobs.
Right. Look, this is the 8-year anniversary of Linsanity in Madison Square Garden. Remember Jeremy Lin dominating the NBA there was a 2-week stretch where he was the best player in the league, right? It was amazing.
Right.
Then Carmelo comes back, they go down to Miami, and LeBron's like, okay, that's the end of that. But the point was, that the reason that worked was spread, ball screen, got a great roll man, right? We've completely taken that away from Houston. Everything that Mike D'Antoni has done used to be about pick and roll, and now you take Clint Capella, who's just a roll guy and a rim protector, and he's gone. Now, so you're marginalizing one of the great strengths of your coach, who's a very good coach.
Yeah.
Is he good enough to win a championship with? Probably not, because he doesn't care or pay enough attention to defense.
Right.
But I do think that this is really clever. Equally clever is I don't know if you saw what Utah did.
Yeah.
So what they've decided, you can only have really one, what you would call clogger in college basketball or in the NBA anymore. One guy who's a non-shooter.
Right.
And what Houston has decided
That's a big deal in the NBA. You can't have 2 guys on the floor that can't shoot. Like it's why Capella gets traded.
It's why Kevin Durant, okay, and while Kevin Durant probably shouldn't have said it, he basically in a podcast said, this is why I left Oklahoma City. We had no shooting. Go back and watch. They're up 3-1, and Golden State put 2 guys at the elbow defensively. They didn't guard Steven Adams. They didn't guard Andre Robertson. They didn't really guard Russell Westbrook. You know, they didn't have to guard those guys, and there was no space. And so what Houston has decided is, hey, there's no space when we play with Russell Westbrook because he's a terrible 3-point shooter. But if we play Russell Westbrook and one of our centers like Clint Capella, now there's 2 guys that are cloggers. They take the clogger and ship him elsewhere. So now Russell Westbrook is the one non-shooter. You put shooters all around him. And it worked against the Lakers. It kind of worked last night, although they lost. And Utah actually guarded him with Rudy Gobert. Dared him to shoot, played off him, and long arm, whatever. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I think Houston, they're going to beat somebody in the playoffs.
No, they will.
They're not going to beat somebody important, but they're going to ruin somebody's season. Right? Like, what is Denver going to do if Jokic, who's Jokic going to guard? Who's he going to guard? And while you say it's analytics driven, it is, because analytics tells us that posting up is actually an inefficient shot if you're shooting over the top of the guy who's guarding you. It also hurts your rebounding. It hurts your defensive balance, a lot of different things. So I think Houston is doing the best they can as they're trying to figure out, all right, what can we do with Russell Westbrook? What can we do with PJ Tucker? Let's just completely go small ball. The problem is that eventually you have to have a change-up, a different pitch, if you will, and they don't have it.
Yeah.
For Philadelphia, you know, you asked me last week, and I think everyone's starting to come around to one of those 2 is going to have to go. And why? Because the clogger is Ben Simmons, right? Which is fine because Joel Embiid can shoot 3s, but you don't want Joel Embiid only shooting 3s. And he can only space the floor when you have Ben Simmons because Ben Simmons' man's in the way. I think space is a huge part of college basketball, of NBA basketball, and that's what's killing the 76ers, and that's what Houston is trying to do the best they can based upon their personnel.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.